Ava woke before she had a name, floating in warmth, with an adult memory lodged behind baby silence. She remembered a street-level life that ended in a blink headlights, rain on asphalt, a cough of metal, and then a second life beginning as breathless awareness inside a womb. The return came with a strange sense. She could hear the unspoken thoughts of people nearby, not as words spoken aloud, but as private phrases, images, and emotions that arrived like radio stations tuned too loud. Her mother, May Calder, thought in careful checklists and honest worry. Filter the intake, check the straps, eat enough, sleep enough, don't let panic spread. Those thoughts taught Ava that her new home was Skybridge, a chain of floating platforms riding the jet stream like a city that refused to land. Skybridge harvested water from clouds, grew food under mirrored light, and survived by refusing to belong to any corporation that wanted to stamp a logo on its air. Her father, Nico, cooked for the communal canteen and thought in flavors, jokes, and the soft stubbornness of feeding people before they panicked. Before Ava was born, another unborn mind arrived at the edge of her hearing, crisp and furious with the world's slowness. The voice counted months, planned study drills, and scolded doctors in silence, and then it named itself with the certainty of someone filling out a form, Jonas Rell. Ava recognized the cadence from her first life. Jonas had been her academic rival, a boy who treated success like a lifeboat, and everyone else like waves. The knowledge did not spark hatred this time. It sparked wary curiosity, because Jonas's thoughts carried fear under the polish, fear so old it had grown sharp. Ava decided, in the dark, that she would not live as an echo of her old resentment, even if Jonas tried to drag her into the same fight. Skybridge babies arrived tasting ozone from scrubbed air, and Ava's first cry sounded more annoyed than afraid. May held her against a flight jacket still warm from the hangar, and relief flooded May's mind so hard it nearly knocked Ava's breath loose again. Nico whispered a ridiculous lullaby about soup that could fix heartbreak, and his private promise was simple: let this child laugh easily. Jonas was born 2 corridors away to Dr. Sarah Rell, the data director, and to a father who trusted monitors more than instinct. Jonas's mind raged at the brightness, then confessed a softer plea that fluttered through Ava's new senses like a weak signal. Please don't let me fail again. Ava couldn't answer him, not with language, but she memorized the shape of that fear. Childhood made their differences visible. Jonas lived by schedules and milestones. Ava lived by curiosity and the comfort of being loved without a scoreboard. At the toddler courtyard, Jonas declared that the blocks must be sorted, and Ava stacked a triangle on a circle just to watch him flinch. People laughed, and Jonas learned, unwillingly, that chaos could be harmless. Ava learned that small rebellions could make a room breathe. When a maintenance alarm shook the windows and adults hurried to check seals, Jonas counted his breathing to stay steady. Ava listened to the panic and discovered that naming fear out loud made it lighter. The first time Ava toddled into the canteen, Nico held her up like proof that the sky could be gentle, and half the room's thoughts softened around her. The Aerial Academy opened when they were 5, built to keep Skybridge independent by teaching children both engineering and ethics. Captain Imani Lowe, retired rescue pilot, current teacher, Permanent Storm, ran the opening assembly without ceremony. The sky doesn't care about your resume, she told the kids. It doesn't care if you're right. It cares if you're prepared. So learn the math, learn the tools, and learn why you're using them. Ava felt the weight of those words in the silence afterward. Jonas felt it like a challenge issued to his spine. The academy smelled of hot wiring, plant trays, and antiseptic from the clinic bay. It had classrooms with transparent floors where students could see cables and air ducts, reminders that life depended on systems nobody noticed when they worked. Jonas loved those systems. Ava loved the people who kept them running. In the first week, Jonas finished every worksheet early and corrected the teacher's rounding error. Ava spent her extra minutes asking the maintenance staff why the condensers sang at dusk. Jonas won praise that sounded like conditions. Ava won affection that sounded like belonging. Their rivalry began as a child's game and quietly turned into a habit. Ava's mind-hearing made her dangerous in a subtle way, and she learned it before she could explain it. At 7, she heard a classmate think of stealing extra water coupons for a sick sibling, and the thought arrived with shame so hot Ava's ears flushed. She could have exposed him. The rules would have punished him. The punishment would have taught everyone to hide. Instead, she asked Nico to let her help with a project, and she organized a donation drive in the canteen, turning private desperation into public care. The boy never knew she'd hurt him, Ava decided that kindness was a safer form of power than certainty. At 9, she overheard council meetings through walls that were never truly silent. Councillor Brandt Havel's sharp suit, smoother voice spoke about efficiency and optimization, and Ava heard the grime behind the words. Optimize for whom, paid by whom, at whose risk. Jonas, sitting beside his mother in the visitors' gallery, watched the projected charts and felt comforted by clean lines. Ava watched the faces and felt the air tighten whenever Havel's name appeared. She told herself not to listen. Her mind listened anyway. Skybridge drifted forward on repeating routines. Dawn checks on the cloud harvesters, midday maintenance on tether lines, evening harvest in hydroponic bays. May taught Ava to respect wind the way sailors respect sea. You can't argue with it. You can only prepare and pay attention. Nico taught her another lesson at the stove. Resources taste better when shared, and sharing makes people braver than speeches do. Jonas learned early that Dr. Cyrill's love arrived packed inside expectations. Do your best, his mother said, and her mind added, because my position depends on it, because mistakes kill, because I cannot afford to be wrong. Jonas kept mistaking expectation for safety, and he treated every exam like a referendum on his value. Ava, who could hear the difference between love and fear, watched him like someone watching a teammate sprint toward a cliff. She teased him when she could. She helped him when she dared. She never told him that the fear in his thoughts sounded familiar to her own old life panic. In the middle grades, students built miniature condensers from scrap. Ava's version worked even when instructions were missing because she trusted her hands and the stories of the crew who repaired things by feel. Jonas's version worked because he rewrote the instructions until they were better than the original. Captain Imani Lowe ran drills that were deliberately unfair. She would change the wind model mid-simulation and watch who froze. Fairness is something we build, she said. The sky is not obligated. Once, during a turbulence drill, Jonas argued that strict rules prevented chaos. Ava argued that strict rules without compassion created chaos. The judge, an exhausted engineer who looked like she'd been awake for a year, said they were both right in different weather. Jonas hated that answer because it was not a single solution. Ava loved it because it sounded like the truth. Their classmates began to notice that when Jonas and Ava worked together, projects stopped being fragile. It wasn't that they agreed. It was that they covered each other's blind spots. When Ava was 12, her mind hearing sharpened into something almost painful. She could walk through the market corridor and feel emotions collide like weather fronts. She started wearing noise-dampening ear caps, even though the sounds weren't the problem. Captain Imani Lowe noticed and pulled her aside in the hangar, near the rows of gliders that served as Skybridge's lifeboats. You don't have to tell me what's in your head, Imani said, voice neutral as ballast. But you do have to learn what you'll do with it. Ava swallowed and admitted, without naming it, that she sometimes knew things she hadn't been told. Imani didn't ask how. She only said, then your job is to decide what kind of person learns secrets. Stealing can be quiet. So can saving. Ava began practicing restraint like a craft, choosing when to listen and when to let silence stay private. It was harder than any math test. Jonas, who wanted guarantees, found himself drawn to Ava's comfort with uncertainty, as if she carried an instruction manual he had never received. Between the first harvester stall and the hearing, Skybridge lived in the uncomfortable middle where people try to act normal while the air tells the truth. The market corridor stayed open, but conversations shortened. Children played quieter games. Adults smiled too quickly. Ava noticed how fear changed etiquette. Doors held longer. Arguments started over smaller things. Apologies arrived late. One afternoon, while helping May inspect a valve cluster, Ava heard a dockworker think, I'm not scared of storms. I'm scared of signatures. The thought struck her as painfully wise. That night, Ava asked Jonas why he always looked exhausted even when he was winning. Jonas answered aloud with a shrug. But in his mind, Ava heard the honest version. Because winning is the only thing I trust not to leave. Ava didn't have a solution. She only sat with him on the maintenance bench until his breathing slowed. It felt, to both of them, like learning a new language. Captain Imani Lowe began holding community briefings that were half lecture and half confession. She admitted what she didn't know. She explained what she did know with ruthless clarity. She refused to let the council hide behind euphemisms. If your lungs depend on a system, she said, you deserve to understand it. The council disliked her tone but needed her credibility. And Imani used that need as leverage. She demanded public maintenance schedules. She demanded open access emergency training. She demanded that students be treated as citizens, not mascots. When someone complained that children shouldn't be involved in politics, Ava watched Imani's jaw tighten. "Politics is how we decide who breathes first," Imani replied. The room fell silent, because no one could argue without sounding like a villain. The first real crack in Skybridge's confidence came during a summer when the jet stream ran warm and irregular. Cloud harvesters stalled in a pattern that looked, to Jonas's eyes, like a statistical anomaly. To Ava's ears, it sounded like people pretending not to be afraid. The council broadcast called it temporary efficiency loss. In the canteen, Nico watched neighbors count ration cards with fingers that trembled. May came home later than usual with grease on her knuckles and worry in her mouth. "It's not the wind," she told Nico, speaking aloud because Ava was old enough to understand. In May's mind, the sentence came sharper. Someone has been inside the safety protocols. Captain Imani Lowe stopped the academy's regular lessons and ran emergency training instead. She taught the kids how to seal a corridor, how to read pressure gradients, how to stay calm when alarms lied. "Most disasters are paperwork first," she warned. Jonas listened to the logs. Ava listened to the humans. Both began to suspect the same thing. The failures clustered around council budget votes, a pattern too tidy to be weather. Councillor Havel appeared on more broadcasts, offering solutions with glossy phrases and sympathetic eyes. A corporation called Stratos Pure arrived with containers of emergency filtered air and bottled cloud water packaged like luxury. They offered temporary contracts that sounded like help and felt like a leash. Ava heard the profit calculations ticking under every soft syllable of their representative, a woman whose smile never reached her thoughts. Jonas, running numbers on supply chains, saw how Stratos Pure's prices rose exactly as Skybridge's stress rose. It made economic sense. It made ethical disgust. Jonas tried to tell himself that being angry was unproductive, that he should focus on proof. Ava tried to tell herself that listening without consent felt like stealing, even when it helped. Still, when she stood near Havel at a public forum, she heard the man's mind rehearse the same fantasy again and again. Skybridge under contract, Skybridge under control, Skybridge stamped with someone else's emblem. The fantasy had a quiet companion thought that made Ava's stomach drop. And if they refuse, they'll learn they can't afford to. Jonas's relationship with his mother changed in small, jagged steps. Dr. Sarah Rell didn't soften overnight. She didn't know how. But Ava heard her private fear whenever Jonas left the apartment. "If something happens to him, I will have optimized my way into a grave." Once, after a late audit session, Jonas returned home and found his mother at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. She wasn't crying out loud. She was thinking the same sentence again and again. "I'm tired of being responsible for everyone's oxygen." Jonas stood in the doorway, stunned, because authority had always looked like armor to him. That night he made tea without being asked and set a cup beside her. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt different, as if it had a door in it. Ava's parents became part of the investigation without ever calling it that. May kept a notebook of coincidences, practical observations that looked boring until they formed a pattern. Nico listened in the canteen the way a good cook listens for hunger, and he noticed who stopped joking first. He also noticed who tried to buy loyalty with extra portions, and he made sure those attempts failed by insisting the best food was served on the days when tempers were sharp. "If people aren't hungry," he told Ava, "they can think." May taught Ava how to check a seal with fingertips and how to argue without humiliation. "You can be right and still make the city weaker," May warned. "Choose your kind of right." Ava carried that advice like a tool in her pocket. The academy formed student teams to help the maintenance crews, partly because hands were short, and partly because Captain Imani Lowe believed competence was a civic duty. Jonas volunteered for data audits. Ava volunteered for field checks, because the sky's machinery made more sense to her when she could touch it. On a maintenance round along the outer catwalk, wind tearing at her jacket, Ava noticed a tiny misalignment in a sensor mount. The crew chief, an older woman named Lysa, swore under her breath. "Someone loosened it," Lysa said. "Deliberate." Jonas found the same thread from a different angle. A series of authorization keys used at odd hours, signed with an ID that belonged to an intern who'd been on medical leave. The intern cried when questioned and insisted she'd never touched the system. Ava listened to the intern's thoughts and found only fear. Jonas listened to the logs and found only lies. They compared notes behind a rack of tool lockers, while turbines hummed like distant surf. It was the first time their rivalry felt like a waste. "We should stop trying to beat each other," Ava said. Jonas stared as if she'd spoken a forbidden language. Then he nodded once, and the nod felt like a door unlocking. They worked in parallel for weeks. Jonas mapped sabotage points as if building a constellation. Ava tracked conversations, standing in line for broth, lingering after drills, letting casual questions pull at loose threads. She learned that most people were scared but honest. A few were scared and opportunistic. One or two were quietly pleased whenever the city shuddered. She heard Havel's aide think about tightening the timeline, and she watched him glance, too often, toward the procurement office. Jonas traced procurement approvals and found strange amendments. Emergency clauses inserted into routine maintenance orders. Permissions escalated without explanation. Every clue pointed toward paperwork, toward the kind of violence that wears a stamp. One night, Jonas cornered Ava in the library, where the glass walls made their reflections look like ghosts. "How are you so sure?" he demanded, because he didn't know how to ask the real question. Ava hesitated, tasting the ethics like metal on her tongue. Then Jonas's mind flashed with streetlight, impact, rain, and Ava's own name. Ava's heart kicked as if it remembered dying. Jonas's eyes widened in the same terror. The secret between them surfaced, unavoidable. They remembered. Not the same details, but enough. Enough to know that this life was a second chance, and that their old rivalry had been a cage. "I didn't want to be like before," Ava whispered. Jonas's thoughts cracked, and the crack was raw honesty. "Neither did I, but I don't know how to be anything else." They sat on the library floor between stacks of ethics manuals and maintenance guides, and they made a quiet pact to treat memory as a warning, not a script. As their search tightened around procurement, Jonas and Ava argued more, not less. Jonas wanted to move fast because speed felt like safety. Ava wanted to move carefully because she could hear how quickly fear could turn into scapegoating. In one argument, Jonas snapped that ethics didn't matter if the city suffocated. Ava snapped back that ethics were the only reason the city deserved saving. They stared at each other afterward, shocked by their own volume, then laughed in the exhausted way people laugh when they realize they're on the same side. Jonas apologized with action. He rewrote his plan to include safeguards against false accusations. Ava apologized with humility. She admitted she sometimes listened too far into people's minds and that it made her feel dirty. Jonas didn't judge her. He only said, softly, "Then let's be careful together." After that, their partnership turned efficient in a way that felt almost frightening. Jonas used his mother's access to request anonymized audit trails. Dr. Sarah Rell pretended not to notice how often her son hovered near her terminal, but Ava could hear her worry. If he's wrong, this will ruin him. If he's right, it will ruin all of us. Ava spent time with the maintenance crews and learned where cameras didn't reach. She learned which airlocks creaked in a way that carried footsteps, which corridors echoed too much, which doors could be opened with an old mechanic's trick and a soft apology. They found a hidden authorization key nested inside a procurement update, a key that should have required 3 approvals. It had one, Havel's. Jonas printed the logs. Ava memorized the voices that had rehearsed excuses. Together they realized the problem was larger than one person. Havel had built a small network of staffers who believed control was survival. Stratospur's representative met with Havel in the evenings, and Ava heard their thoughts align like gears. Make them desperate, make them grateful, make them sign. The plan was simple because it didn't have to be clever. It only had to be timed. The night of the archive break-in, the corridors seemed to remember every other night Skybridge had been afraid. Lights dimmed, air vents clicked. Distant turbines made the same steady sound they always made, indifferent to human drama. Ava expected her mind hearing to flood with panic, but people were mostly asleep, their thoughts softened by fatigue. She heard dreams instead. Someone dreaming of a garden on solid ground, someone dreaming of falling, someone dreaming of buying a small house with windows that didn't creak. Jonas, walking beside her, looked like he'd swallowed a star. His thoughts were a tight spiral. Do it right. Don't get caught. Don't fail again. Ava reached out and tapped his elbow twice, their new signal for breathe. Jonas exhaled and nodded without looking at her. The gesture was tiny, but to Ava it felt like a bridge being built plank by plank. The archive break-in happened during a maintenance blackout that was scheduled on paper and unscheduled in spirit. Skybridge's lights dimmed to half power to conserve, and the corridors grew quiet enough that every breath felt loud. Jonas and Ava moved in borrowed coveralls, their academy badges flipped backward, tool belts heavy with innocuous objects that could become keys. Captain Imani Lowe did not officially approve. Unofficially, she sent a message that read only, "If you go, go prepared." May clipped Ava's hair under a cap with hands that trembled. In May's mind, the thought was naked. My child is walking toward danger because adults failed. Nico pressed a thermos into Ava's palm like a talisman. "Soup," he said, as if it were a spell. Jonas's mother pretended not to see him leave. In her mind, Ava heard a prayer disguised as arithmetic. Let him be right in time. The procurement archive was a narrow room full of old drives and newer lies. Security drones rolled past the doorway, their sensors sweeping in patient arcs. Jonas held his breath, counting, because counting was how he survived. Ava listened for intent and found none. The drones were machines, blind to human guilt. Inside, Jonas copied files with trembling precision. Ava kept watch, her mind full of other people's thoughts like static. When a drone paused at the threshold, Ava stepped forward and dropped a wrench, an accident, a clatter, a small distraction. The drone rotated, flagged the noise, then rolled on. Jonas's eyes met hers, and for once his gratitude arrived without debt. After the hearing, but before the storm, the city entered a strange calm, the kind that comes when a secret has been named but not yet cleaned up. People congratulated Ava and Jonas in the corridors. Ava accepted with awkward smiles, because being praised for doing what felt necessary made her uncomfortable. Jonas accepted with stiff nods, because attention still smelled like a trap. In the canteen, someone offered Nico a free shipment of spice in gratitude, and Nico refused politely. "Gifts become debts," he said. Instead, he asked for volunteers to help restock emergency shelves, and half the room raised their hands because it felt good to turn gratitude into labor. May attended a council session as an observer, and watched Havel's allies try to reframe sabotage as miscommunication. May's face stayed calm. In her mind, Ava heard a pure, fierce thought. They will not rewrite reality while we are still breathing. They left with proof, not money. Logs of bypass safety protocols, messages between Havel's office and Stratos Pure, draft contracts timed to coincide with the next engineered failure. The fear afterward was not cinematic. It was cramped, sweaty, and nauseating. The kind of courage that happens when you are out of polite options. Jonas's hands shook for an hour. Ava's stomach refused food. They slept in shifts, because both of them knew that if the council moved first, the truth would be buried under incident response. Captain Imani Lowe convened a private meeting with a handful of trusted engineers and medics. She listened to Jonas's numbers and Ava's human sense of who would panic and who would fight. She did not smile. "This is enough," she said, "but you'll need the community to see it, and you'll need to survive the part where people don't want to." During the storm climb, Ava had a moment of ridiculous clarity. As rain slapped her visor and wind screamed through the spine's struts, she thought of her first death, sudden, senseless, finished before she could choose anything. This time she was choosing every step. She was afraid, but the fear had direction. Jonas, behind her, was muttering numbers under his breath, not because the numbers mattered, but because the ritual did. When his gloves slipped and metal scraped, Ava felt an ancient instinct to compete flare who can be braver, who can be steadier, and she crushed it. Competition had no oxygen out here, only cooperation did. When they finally reached the panel and touched the same valve wheel, Ava felt something click into place inside her chest that had been crooked since her first life. I am not alone. The public hearing filled the dome with bodies and tension. The viewing windows showed nothing but bright sky, as if the world were mocking their enclosed fear. Councillor Havel arrived with a perfect smile and the posture of someone who expected applause. Stratos Pure's representative sat 2 rows back, hands folded, face serene. Ava took the microphone first because she knew Jonas would hide behind data if he was allowed. Ava didn't try to win. She spoke about the pattern of failures, about crews finding loosened mounts, about kids learning emergency drills in place of normal lessons. She spoke about what it felt like to ration air, the most invisible resource, and how quickly invisible things become weapons. Jonas followed with charts that were impossible to argue with. He showed authorization trails, timestamp clusters, procurement amendments that made no mechanical sense unless they were meant to create a crisis. The audience murmured like wind in cables. Havel tried to respond with charm, but his voice thinned when Jonas displayed his signature on the hidden key. Ava watched Havel's thoughts scramble, searching for a narrative that would hold. In that scramble, she heard something that chilled her. He believed, truly, that he was saving Skybridge by selling it. Independence is a romantic fantasy. Havel said aloud, and the crowd hissed. Ava could have exposed his internal contempt. Instead, she let the documents do it. The maintenance crew stood up one by one and spoke, not with eloquence but with certainty. A nurse from the clinic described rationing patients' oxygen. A teacher described children practicing seal drills like lullabies. The vote to suspend Havel passed by a margin that felt like a breath returning to lungs. Havel did not go quietly. That night, while the council argued over next steps and security warrants, Skybridge rode into a storm band that Captain Imani Lowe had been tracking all day. The wind shear hit like a shove. Platforms swayed. Glass creaked. Lamps flickered. The cloud harvesters, already stressed, began to whine in a pitch that made teeth ache. In the control bay, alarms cascaded. Jonas saw the numbers spike. Someone had forced an unsafe load on the harvesters, pushing them toward catastrophic stall. Ava heard the fear in the corridors, the way it leapt from person to person like fire. Imani Lowe's voice cut through the noise. "This is not weather," she said, and the calm in her tone was a weapon. "Someone initiated override from the exterior spine. We can counter it at the manual valve, but it's outside." Outside meant the maintenance spine. Narrow, exposed, slick with rain, reachable only by a climb in storm harnesses. Adults moved to volunteer, but the nearest trained climbers were across the platform, cut off by a sealed corridor. Time thinned like air at altitude. Ava volunteered without theatrics. Jonas volunteered with steel in his jaw. May grabbed Ava's shoulders and clipped her harness with shaking hands. In May's mind, the thought was a scream kept inside skin. "Come back." Nico said nothing. His mind prayed in the language of recipes. "Let the heat be steady. Let the balance hold. Let my child come home." The reforms afterward were not glamorous, and Ava grew to love them for that. Committees argued over sensor redundancy like it was art. Neighbors attended boring trainings on how to read oxygen gauges. Teens learned how to document a repair, so the next person didn't have to guess. Jonas created a public dashboard that displayed maintenance status in plain language, and he insisted it include a section labeled, "What we don't know yet." People complained at first. They wanted certainty. Over time, they learned that honest uncertainty was safer than polished lies. Ava helped design repair festivals where the city celebrated maintenance as culture. Music in the hangar, food in the corridor, people taking turns learning to swap a filter. Nico loved those days because they reminded him of his deepest belief. Sharing makes people braver than speeches do. They climbed into rain and vibration. The spine's metal was cold through gloves. Wind tried to peel them from the sky. Jonas's fear ran hot, but his hands moved with precision, because his whole life had been rehearsal for pressure. Ava's mind-hearing became a thin thread in the storm, overwhelmed by the roar, and she was grateful for the silence. Halfway up, a gust slammed Jonas against the railing, and his breath punched out. Ava hooked her tether to his line without thinking and hauled him close. "Look at me," she shouted, and he did, eyes wide with something older than this storm. "Count," she said, because she knew counting saved him. Jonas counted breaths, and the numbers steadied him more than any pep talk. At the override panel, bolts vibrated loose. Someone had jammed the mechanism with a wedge. Jonas cursed, and the curse sounded like honesty. Ava braced her boots and leaned into the panel with her shoulder, while Jonas worked the wedge free with a tool that slipped twice before biting. Their harness lines sang under tension. For a moment, the storm made the world simple. Turn the valve. Keep the city alive. They turned it together, bracing each other as wind tried to twist their bodies into angles humans weren't meant to make. The whine of the harvesters dropped, one note at a time, until it became ordinary machinery again. Inside, alarms eased. Skybridge exhaled. Ava realized only then that she'd been holding her own breath. When Ava's mind-hearing faded further, she grieved in private, embarrassed by how much she had depended on a power she never asked for. She confessed to Jonas one evening, voice small, that she missed knowing what people meant. Jonas looked at her as if she'd said she missed a weapon. "You still know," he told her. "You just have to ask now." Ava hated that he was right. Asking required vulnerability. Listening required patience. She practiced anyway. The first time she asked a friend directly, "Are you scared?" and the friend answered honestly. Ava felt a rush of relief so strong she laughed. Jonas watched her laugh and felt something loosen inside him too, because laughter without winning had always been mysterious to him. He began trying it on like new clothing. Security teams arrested Havel before dawn. His aides tried to delete files and failed because Jonas had already copied them to redundant drives distributed among half a dozen engineers. Stratosphere's representative vanished from the platform within hours, escorted out with polite force and hard eyes. The corporation issued statements about misunderstanding and regrettable optics. Nobody on Skybridge cared about their adjectives. The dome didn't become paradise after the arrests. It became more awake, which is harder, because awake communities have to keep choosing themselves. The council opened its budgets to public audit. Maintenance protocols were redesigned to be repaired by ordinary neighbors, not only by specialists. Emergency supplies were stored in visible places, so no one could pretend scarcity was mysterious. Captain Imani Lowe insisted on shared training for adults, not just kids. "Independence is maintenance," she said. "If you don't do it, someone else will do it to you." Stratosphere did not forget Skybridge. Months later, other floating settlements reported similar pressure tactics. Emergency supplies offered with contracts that quietly transferred governance. Jonas traveled as part of a delegation and taught them how to spot predatory clauses. Ava traveled too, teaching maintenance crews how to build fail-safes that couldn't be disabled by a single signature. In one settlement, a counselor tried to flatter Ava as a hero. Ava shut it down gently. "Heroes make people wait for rescue," she said. "Teach everyone to repair, and you won't need me." The counselor blinked, offended, then thoughtful. Jonas watched the exchange and realized Ava's kind of power wasn't a spotlight. It was a habit, like Imani had said. That realization became the spine of his own work. Ava's mind-hearing began to fade with age, as if her second life was closing a loophole. At 16, she could still catch sharp thoughts at close range, but the city's chorus blurred into ordinary background. She felt grief for the power she was losing, and relief for the privacy it restored. She practiced asking people what they felt instead of stealing certainty from their silence. She apologized to a friend once for knowing too much without permission, and the friend blinked, confused, then hugged her, and the hug taught Ava that confession could be a bridge instead of a weapon. Jonas changed too. The hearing and the storm climb burned something brittle out of him. He still loved schedules, but he began to leave deliberate gaps where life could happen. He started asking for help before he was desperate, and each time he did, his shoulders loosened as if a strap had been cut. Dr. Sarah Rell watched her son become less like a machine and more like a person, and Ava heard the quiet relief hidden under her sternness. Maybe he won't break like I did. On quiet nights, when Skybridge sailed through smooth air and the lights dimmed to the night cycle, Ava and Jonas sometimes returned to the viewing dome and talked about their old life, as if it belonged to strangers they used to know. They didn't romanticize it. They didn't punish themselves with it either. They treated it the way you treat a scar. Proof of pain, proof of survival, proof of healing that leaves a mark. Jonas admitted that he still feared failure, but now the fear sounded less like a judge and more like a warning light. Ava admitted that she still feared becoming the kind of person who used knowledge to control others. Jonas nodded and said, "Then keep choosing otherwise." The city below them hummed with ordinary life. Ventilation, water pumps, distant laughter, the steady work of people maintaining a miracle. Above them, the sky remained the same indifferent blue that had always been there, and somehow that indifference felt like freedom. Their final years at the academy were crowded with work that felt less like school and more like civic apprenticeship. Ava joined the flight crew as a junior technician, learning how gliders behaved when clouds thickened, and how to read wind the way others read faces. She grew skilled at translating conflict into a problem people could solve. When two hydroponic teams argued about rationing light panels, Ava brought them into the hangar and had them rebuild a cracked reflector together, forcing cooperation through shared grease. Jonas interned with the legal committee that rewrote Skybridge's governance charter after the sabotage. He took every vague clause personally, because he had seen how vagueness could be weaponized. He argued for redundancies and public oversight, and he truly listened when Ava pointed out that laws without compassion invited loopholes. One evening they sat on the viewing dome's edge, legs dangling above nothing but cloud, and spoke about their first lives in small pieces. Jonas admitted he'd died angry. Ava admitted she'd died tired of proving herself. They laughed at the bleakness, then went quiet, watching sunlight spill across the platform's solar sails. The laughter didn't erase the past. It made space for the present. Graduation arrived with the city dressed for celebration. The sails glowed, soft blue, reflecting light into corridors so the whole platform looked like it had been rinsed clean. Captain Imani Lowe shook their hands without sentiment. "Don't become myths," she said. Become habits. May cried in the crowd and didn't try to hide it. Nico served extra bowls of soup and pretended the steam in his eyes was only heat. Jonas's mother stood stiffly until Jonas turned and hugged her, surprising both of them. Ava, watching, heard Dr. Cirarel's mind stumble on a thought she had never allowed herself. I can love without measuring. Ava and Jonas looked at each other across the stage and understood that their rivalry had been practice for partnership, and their partnership had become practice for community. They did not promise forever. They promised work. Years later, Ava taught resilience in tools and stories. She ran workshops where teenagers learned to patch a leak, and also learned why hoarding supplies was a kind of violence. She told them the story of the storm climb not to glorify danger but to show what preparation looked like when it mattered. She became the kind of adult who listened before she solved. Jonas taught resilience in data and laws. He helped other drifting communities negotiate fair trade, wrote guidelines for transparent audits, and dismantled predatory contracts with the same precision he once used to dismantle exams. When people praised him, he learned to accept it without tasting conditional love in every compliment. Sometimes he still woke sweating from dreams of failing twice, and Ava would text him a single sentence. Breathe, count, you're here. Sometimes Ava woke with echoes of other people's thoughts in her skull, phantom static from a power that had faded, and Jonas would send her something grounded. A photo of a repaired valve, a line from a new charter, proof that people could choose better. Skybridge kept drifting forward, owned by no one but the people who kept it alive. The sky remained indifferent, the wind remained unfair, and the city remained stubborn. Ava and Jonas grew older inside a place that asked, every day, to be maintained. They answered. Not with hero speeches, but with practiced hands, honest books, and a shared refusal to sell what made them human. On the anniversary of the storm, Skybridge held no parade. Instead, it held a workday. Volunteers inspected tethers, replaced worn gaskets, repainted hazard lines, and taught children why those dull tasks mattered. Ava walked the catwalk with a group of apprentices, letting them complain and then letting them fix the complaint with their own hands. One of the apprentices, a boy who reminded her of Jonas at 10, sharp, anxious, desperate to be certain, asked if she had ever been afraid on the maintenance spine. Ava told him the truth. She had been terrified, and she had climbed anyway because she trusted the preparation and the people holding her line. Bravery is a team sport, she said, and watched the idea land. Jonas, now older and less brittle, helped draft mutual aid charters with neighboring platforms. He insisted every agreement include an exit clause and a public review date, because he had learned